Okay, good afternoon. We want to update our community following the police-involved shooting yesterday just down the street from police headquarters. Obviously, there are two items in front of you. One is a replica handgun, and the other one is a real handgun capable of firing real bullets. And we'll get to that in just a few moments. Yesterday, two intelligence detectives were here, right here at police headquarters, and they were attending a meeting about the spate of violence that Baltimore has experienced over the last 48 hours. Several homicides and several non-fatal shootings, all involving firearms, obviously, caused intelligence detectives and other detectives from throughout the agency to meet here at headquarters to discuss our plan of action and our response to the uptick in violence. Two of those detectives made their way back to their district station after the meeting here at headquarters. One is a 12-year veteran, a male police officer, and the other, a female police officer, is a 6-year veteran. And as they were driving down Baltimore Street, they saw a 13-year-old with a basketball in one hand and what looked like a firearm, a gun, in his other hand. The police officers identified themselves verbally as the police, and they told him to stop and drop the gun, and the 13-year-old ran from the police. He ran about 100 yards to the intersection of Baltimore Street and Asquith Street. He then turned on Asquith Street, and then he ran about 50 more yards. So in all, about a 150-yard or so foot chase. And as he was running up Asquith Street, at some point he stopped and turned toward our police officers. He still had the firearm in his hand, or what looked like a firearm in his hand, and one of our two police officers, the male police officer, the 12-year veteran, shot and wounded the 13-year-old. Now, there's several questions that the police department has, several questions the community has. This is yesterday was the 1-year anniversary, April 27th, such a important date for our city, for our police department, for me personally, and to have this occur 1 year later certainly has garnered attention, and it should garner attention. And then the age, the 13-year-old, that always and always will, always should generate questions, and those questions are always and will always be questions that will hold public safety accountable for our actions. And I've continued to say all along that as your police commissioner, as this city's police commissioner, I'm going to call balls and strikes. I'm going to call it like I see it. So in spite of the outcome of this police encounter yesterday, and no one, let's be clear, wants to respond to any 13-year-old being shot anywhere. But when it involves a police officer, it brings heightened scrutiny and additional attention. So these two police officers yesterday didn't wake up thinking they were going to get involved with a foot chase of a 13-year-old holding what looks like to be a gun. They did what our community expects them to do. And one of the hypothetical questions I'll pose is if someone is seen, if a person is seen walking down a city street with one of those in his hand, what do they want the police to do? What do they expect us to do? Drive by? We can't call 911. We are 911. What do folks expect us to do? If that happens in front of your house, on your street, in your neighborhood, and someone's walking down the street with what looks like to be a gun in his hand, the response, in my opinion, by the police department or for the police department is to do something about it. And these two police officers, 18 years experience in all, identified themselves verbally as police officers. They ran after this 13-year-old who decided to run for whatever reason. I don't know why he decided to run, and got involved in police-involved shooting that we wish didn't happen, but it did happen. So the greater conversation really is what is a 13-year-old doing with one of these in his hand? And I wish I had an answer for you for that. It's something that certainly this community can do without. And with the spate of violence that has existed for a long, long time, the gun violence in particular in Baltimore, we want to keep anything that's a real gun or a replica gun out of the hands of our children. So certain things should maybe have occurred that would have kept this replica gun out of the hands of this 13-year-old. We don't want him to be in possession of that replica gun, because things like this tragically can happen. And this has nothing to do with police-community relations. This is a police response to a person seen in broad daylight with a gun in his hand in the middle of the street. So we can certainly take any questions. I think Director T.J. Smith is going to walk you through a couple slides here, and he'll speak specifically about the nature of this replica firearm, just to bring some awareness to what we're dealing with.
Well, since we have the gun on the table, I'm not going to really go through much, but this is just showing you where everything occurred. This is where the officers initially encountered the young kid, and he took off running that direction, and that's where it all ended up. So that's what we're showing. The replica firearm is a Powerline 340 Daisy 177 caliber BB gun. It can be obtained for as little as $15 online. It's not something that's sold at places like toy stores. It's something that's sold in hunting and shooting type arenas that you can find this particular gun. Officer Thomas Smith is the officer who was involved. He's on routine administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. And I know there were some questions about the legality of the the replica gun itself. And that's something that we're still working through. There are ordinances in Baltimore against carrying BB guns that air is used or gas is used. So we're still working through that to determine if that falls into the category. But it's probably more important and secondary. Sometimes the law doesn't need to dictate certain things, and carrying a firearm in the city of Baltimore, or a replica firearm in the city of Baltimore that looks like that, is something that don't necessarily need a law to guide you into making a decision not to carry something like that. So we're still working through whether this fits into the category of what's theoretically banned. But again, a lot of it is also involving parental supervision as well. The manufacturer of this particular gun, Daisy, has a warning on their site basically that shouldn't be carried by anyone under 16 without parental advisory, and of course certain places it's illegal to possess anyway. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. I know there are a few, and between myself and
say to the officers as he turned or when he was running, this is a fake gun.
That's something that we're investigating. One of the news channels yesterday interviewed a man who appears to be an independent witness. We have spoken to him as well. We intend to speak to him some more, and I think that witness was inside of his car, and he describes the actions of this 13-year-old as he's running from the police, and some of the things that he says obviously will be the subject of our follow-up investigation.
As a matter of policy, if a person with a firearm, or apparently with a firearm, says to an officer, this is a fake gun, what difference does that make to what the officer then decides to do?
Well, I'll answer that this way, and hopefully it's thought-provoking. The real only way to tell which one of those guns in front of you is real or not is to be on the receiving end of that gun as you're staring down the barrel of it and the trigger is pulled. That's the only time we're ever going to know whether a gun is real or if it's a replica. That's not something that the community wants police officers or anyone to be in a position to only know when a gun is real or not after a bullet is fired at us. So I hope that answers the question.
Commissioner, when the officers gave chase, to your knowledge, did the teenager stop and turn around or make any threatening motions to your knowledge?
Well, we know from obviously we had one police officer who fired and one who didn't. We know from the police officer who did not fire, and we know from this independent witness that or we know pieces of this, that the 13-year-old never dropped the gun, and when he did, if you listen to this independent witness, and again, we're not done interviewing him, when he turned around back toward the police officers, he still had the gun in his hand, and the independent witness describes the 13-year-old as raising the gun. What direction that gun is pointed in is a different question. What the 13-year-old said is a different question, but we're determined to get to the bottom of it. Our Special Investigation Response Team is tasked with completing what, again, I'll say is the most important investigation any police department can do, is to thoroughly and objectively investigate all police-involved shootings, and we're trying to be as transparent as humanly possible in getting out all the information to the community.
Commissioner, would you go over the sequence of events that when the officers saw an individual with they thought was a gun in his hand, did they identify themselves as police officers and then he ran? And if not, is there some concern that the kid didn't realize that police officers were approaching him?
Well, the exact sequence of when words were said versus when police officers started to chase the 13-year-old, I'm not going to get into that level of minutia because the investigation will reveal all that, David, as you well know. But you know, I don't think that anyone expects police officers to sit in their car after they identify themselves as police officers, even if it's verbally, and someone runs down the street with a gun. Again, these police officers are intelligence detectives. They were in plain clothes. They were not anticipating taking enforcement action yesterday afternoon. They typically are assigned investigative duties that require a lot of follow-up and a lot of office-type work. They're sometimes in the community, sometimes they're in the office, so they're a little bit of a hybrid in terms of their job description. But yesterday, they didn't anticipate, again, taking any enforcement action, and they were just coming from an investigative meeting here at headquarters.
And let me real quick address. Hold on real quick, John. Plainclothes versus undercover. That's a question that's come up from members of the media often. Undercover is a role, essentially. It's a role that's being played, and it could be a long-term role where the person is not acting in any capacity as a police officer to whoever they're dealing with. They might not even be carrying credentials necessarily. Plain clothes is an assignment that you're in, and you could be in uniform later on in the evening, or you could be in uniform the next day, so on and so forth. So don't confuse the two, plain clothes and undercover, with one another.
And can I add this to that before the next question? So right now, I'm the only one up here in uniform, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 police officers behind me. They all have guns. Right? If something unanticipated happens in their presence, they're compelled to act. And I would argue that our police officers yesterday were compelled to act when they saw that 13-year-old with a gun in his hand.
So what is standard operational procedure for someone carrying a gun but not pointing it at someone, for someone running from the police?
Well, again, and I'll say this hopefully in a respectful manner, police officers don't have to wait until they're being shot at to engage in a deadly force scenario. I think I stated a few minutes ago that the only time you really know if what looks like a gun is a gun, if it's being pointed at you, is the real thing or not, is after someone starts squeezing the trigger. So the officers yesterday obviously perceived that they were chasing someone with a gun, and at some point in time during that interaction, that so happened to be with a 13-year-old, the 13-year-old did something that prompted one of the police officers to discharge his firearm.
Hold on, John.
No, I just, so obviously as a plainclothes officer, they wouldn't have had body cams. And
Yeah.
any city police crime cameras that might have been in that neighborhood that might have captured
So,
that.
John, we have and are doing follow-up investigations to make sure we've identified any surveillance camera that may have captured part of this or all of it. But as you probably know, body cameras are something they're on the way. We get our first batch of 500 in May, and they'll start to be distributed then. But no police officers had body cameras.
Hold on. Katrina, did you have anything? I want to be respectful to everybody in the room. We have a lot of members of the press here.
Officer fire,
probably didn't discharge a firearm twice, and he was struck twice, non-fatally, thank God.
Where?
Lower extremity and shoulder,
Leg and shoulder.
leg and shoulder.
What are your feelings about the way the aftermath with the mother was handled, her being taken away?
Yeah. So, Justin, we talked a lot about that last night and a lot about that today, and I have two 13-year-olds, and I can only imagine myself or my wife coming outside and seeing the police interact with one of our kids. And I can only imagine when this mother came out, for whatever reason, her attention was drawn outside and saw the police activity, and then learned that her son was shot, not only shot, but shot by a police officer. The emotions run high. So the fact that the police officers on the scene made a decision, a judgment call, during a very volatile scenario, to temporarily restrain the mom with handcuffs was a judgment call that they made given what was happening at that very emotional moment. She was never charged with a crime. We have no intention to charge her with a crime. She was treated as a witness here at police headquarters and gave us a statement. She made a couple statements at the scene, and she was interviewed by detectives back here at headquarters. But again, my heart goes out to this 13-year-old. My heart goes out to his mother. Again, this is not a press conference that we anticipated having the day after the one-year anniversary.
Do you think that was the right call, though? I mean, the way they handled it in retrospect?
For the police officers, you know, it was such an emotional moment, and the mom was, you know, in a state where her emotions were riding high. So I don't know that I know enough to call a ball or a strike on that one yet, but I promise I will when I know more about it. I know I've been at scenes where it's chaotic. You've got someone suffering from a gunshot wound. You've got people coming outside. You've got emotional parents and family members and loved ones. You're still waiting for other cops to get there and help you out with the scene. It's tough to be super critical about that. I think anytime we have a situation where we critique, there's always a learning opportunity. Are there other ways to handle a distraught mom besides handcuffing her? So we are having those discussions where there are alternative ways to deal with mom besides temporarily restraining her with handcuffs. Those questions are in my head as well, and we're going to get better from that.
Juliet and Mike Elgren, if you have anything.
You covered most of it, but just to be really, really clear, when the officer discharged his weapon, he was facing the teenager, and the teenager was stopped as well? They were facing each other?
Well, what I think I'm prepared to describe, and again, I describe what I know. I know that after about a 150-yard chase, the 13-year-old decided to come to a stop, and as he stopped, and again, we know this from an independent witness who was at the scene, and he was sitting inside of his car. We know that teenager turned toward the police with the gun still in his hand. And at that moment, the police officer made a judgment call, and he decided to discharge his firearm.
Mike.
In front of you there, which one is real and which one's the replica?
Well, Mike, what do you think?
I guess it's
You don't have to answer that, but here's the deal. Here you are in the confines of a climate-conditioned room and you know, relatively safe environment. You're not chasing me. I'm not chasing you. We're all pretty. I bet you if you take our pulses in here, they're probably pretty normal, and you can't even tell from where you're sitting. And so just put yourselves in the shoes of these police officers who are in a very emotional moment, and they're chasing someone with a gun. And is it real? And if I could, you know, was it 1980s commercial? Is it live or is it Memorex? They don't have time to sit there and ponder that. But the fact that you and probably others have that question, which one's the replica and which one's the real firearm, is I think indicative of the tough job, the tough profession that we have out here and you know, dealing with the community and people who have those in their hands. And the fact of the matter is, I don't want to get this wrong, the gun to my right is the real Beretta 992 FS, and the gun to my left, your right, is the replica Beretta 92 FS.
So, Commissioner, you've made a big, you know, you've been very vocal about going after illegal handguns when you're the top cop of the city. So I just want to really pin down, if someone is walking outside with a realistic-looking gun, are they in jeopardy of being chased, shot by the police?
Well, that's a provocative question. I understand the nature of your question, but I think it's not a good idea in Baltimore or elsewhere to walk outside of your home with either one of those objects in your hand, whether it's real or not, because you place the community in jeopardy, you place yourself in jeopardy, and you place public safety in jeopardy when you have one of those in your hand, whether, again, it's real or it's a replica. So it's our hope as we go forward and look back at this as a time where we can kind of talk about why replica firearms are even for sale in this country. The replica is not a toy gun, and I don't know if you.
Yeah, and
we
I addressed that. They don't sell these.
It's not on Amazon.
Amazon.
I'm just saying.
Yeah,
Let me finish.
Okay.
They sell them on Amazon in the hunting section, not the toy section. They don't sell them at Toys R Us. They don't sell them at Lionel Kitty City. My point is, you're not going to go to a children's store and find that gun. You're going to go to a sporting goods store and a sporting goods section or a hunting section and find that gun. That's our purpose. This is not a orange tip gun. This is not a water pistol. That's the point that I'm trying to make to you, Mary Rose, that it's a much bigger question that the commissioner was addressing here of the availability of these things. I told you where you found them at. I said you can get them for as little as $15 online. You checked Amazon, I can probably go to eBay. They're there, yes, they're out there for people to purchase. That's not really the question. People can purchase them. It's the decision to arm yourself with one of them when 290 plus people in Baltimore were killed last year with one of these, a handgun. So it just isn't a wise decision in a city like ours to walk out with something like this in the middle of the afternoon. So we all collectively have to be more responsible about situations like this. The question that reporter Helgren brought up, which one is real, is a question that has to be made, an answer that has to be made just like that. And if you're wrong, John, did you have another question?
Well, actually, I think she asked the question, but to the commissioner, I mean, that's essentially your advice for parents of young kids and teenagers, whether it's an actual toy gun or a replica. Just, you can't
Yeah.
walk out of your house.
Yeah, John, not just parents, but peers, other young people, teachers, school administrators, faith-based, and we spent a good amount of time this morning here at police headquarters with some faith leaders from across Baltimore City talking about this scenario, and we ended that very robust, productive conversation talking about how we can take an incident like this where a 13-year-old makes a decision to leave his house with a replica firearm and is shot by the police. How can we take this and do something productive with it?